In my early days as a Unitarian Universalist layperson, I had wonderful mentors and exemplars. One was Aileen Dietrich, president of People's Church, Kalamazoo, Michigan. Her husband dubbed her the Bishop of People's Church, and it was pretty darn close. Aileen had a great talent for sharing her wisdom through personal anecdotes. One was her story of growing up Baptist and going to church every Sunday that rolled. By the time she was a teenager, she'd had enough of it, and she rebelled one Sunday morning and simply refused to go with her parents. At first, she was self-satisfied at having won out over her parents' will, but her satisfaction was soon eclipsed by the onset of a terrible headache that had ruined her Sunday morning freedom. Afterward, she would attend church with her parents now and then, but found that every time she chose to stay home, she got a headache. The moral of the story, as she related it, was that despite her growing doubts about Baptist theology, she missed the sights, the sounds, the singing, the community of church. She found that being alone was the cause of her headache. Years hence, Aileen deeply appreciated her connection with People's Church, and she gave generously of herself through tireless leadership. Another of Aileen's stories that has stuck with me all these years involved her duties as the executor of her father's estate. One of those duties was paying the last of the bills and balancing his checkbook. As she looked through the canceled checks and the check register, she was surprised by how much and how often her father had given to nonprofits and charities. He gave to his church, his alma mater, NPR, Loaves and Fishes, Red Cross, Habitat for Humanity, and many more. Aileen looked at her own checkbook. It reflected expenditures at her favorite dress shop, shoe shop, bakery, dry cleaners, travel agent, decorator, salon, and so forth. Her only giving was to People's Church. All else was consumption. Now, to be fair, Aileen and her father, before he died, were in very different places in their lives. Aileen was married to a prominent attorney in Kalamazoo, and she had to keep up appearances to some degree, or she chose to. And of course, we know younger people consume much more than they save or give away, but as folks age, they tend to want for less materially. Yet, Aileen's discovery of her father's generosity gave her a certain perspective, and she vowed to consume a little less and give away a little more. Years later, in my own aspiration as a member of a Unitarian Universalist congregation, my own aspiration to increase my church pledge, I remembered Aileen's story. So I added up how much I spent on one of my own indulgences, Starbucks. 3 or 4 times a week, I would buy a $4 latte, which didn't seem like a lot buying them one at a time. But then I added it up. It's like $12 or $16 a week. Well, times 52, dang, that's $832 a year. I thought I can give up Starbucks for a year and increase my pledge. While a sugar-free, skinny, venti latte can warm the tummy and lift the spirit, it's short-lived. sharing and building beloved community and singing and learning and doing good works with people who share in my values and beliefs, well, that's a much better investment. What I was choosing to do, and what Aileen was choosing to do at the time, was find a balance between our consumption and our giving, or our investment in things that were meaningful to us, who brought meaning and support and community. In some ways, our checkbooks, or in today's world, our debit card charges, can say much about our priorities in life. Now, let me switch gears and tell you a parable that Jesus told, as reflected in the Gospels. He was a rhetorical genius. He packed a lot of wisdom in his parables, stories that spoke to the coming of a peaceable kingdom of God, using metaphors of the everyday life of the people, of his people. The parable of the lost sheep, the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the prodigal, and so on. An apt parable for today, I think, is that of the parable of the talents. This appears in the Gospel of Matthew, and it speaks metaphorically to the anticipation of the kingdom of God, which Jesus was preaching to his people. But when I consider the story, I can't help but see also a more maybe literal and less imaginative translation, but I can't help but see how it also tells of a vision of abundance, an abundance that enlarges the spirit, and how the myth of scarcity can shroud the spirit. So here's the parable. Preparing to leave his estate to go on a long journey, a man entrusts his property to overseers. To one he gives 5 talents, to the other 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. Now, a talent in this story, a talent, is a large amount of money which would have been worth about 15 years' wages of a laborer. So it's a big amount of money. Well, the first man who was given the 5 talents immediately went and traded with the money, turning it into 10 talents. And in the same way, the second man doubled his 2 talents. The third man immediately dug a hole and hid his talent in the ground. And after a long time, the estate owner returned and settled accounts with the 3 overseers. The first reported his trading with the 5 talents to produce 10. The estate owner was pleased and said, "Well done. I gave you a few things to oversee. You were trustworthy, and now I will put you in charge of many things." Settling accounts with the second overseer, the estate owner rewarded him likewise. The third overseer came forth and said to the estate owner, "I thought of you as a harsh master, reaping where you did not sow. I was afraid, and I hid the talent you gave me in the ground. Now I return it to you. What is yours? I return to you what is yours, master." The estate owner was displeased He said, if you think of me as a harsh master reaping where I did not sow, then you should have invested my money with bankers. And on my return, I would at least have received what was my own with interest. The estate owner took the 1 talent from him and gave it to the first overseer, saying, to those who have, more will be given, and they will have an abundance. From those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. Well, that ending seems a bit harsh, right? But this is not really a story about capitalist success, or a kind of a Joel Osteen prosperity, parable, and it's not even a miser's cautionary tale, but it's a story of creating an abundance through a sense of generosity and a willingness to take risks. The overseers who doubled their money would have had a largeness of spirit, a confidence in having enough skill, enough integrity, enough faith to make good use of what had been given them. This is Jesus' metaphor for having faith, maintaining hope, and a sense of being loved when Jesus' people were really having a hard time in their living, being oppressed by their Roman occupiers. Now, on the other hand, I am haunted by the image of the third overseer nervously burying his money in the ground where it languished for a long time, hidden and useless. Ironically, the fearful man who accused his master of reaping where he didn't sow, he neither sowed nor reaped a thing for himself. Instead, this myth of scarcity stole the man's imagination and made him risk-averse, and ultimately left him unrewarded. So as I said, this parable is not just about money, it's about faith, hope, and love. Where a vision of abundance resides, faith, hope, and love grow, whether it's in the heart of a person or an entire congregation. Integrity, generosity, and high spirits lift up the whole. Where a myth of scarcity prevails, faith, hope, and love are shrouded by fear, and the heart of a person shrinks. Creativity and imagination wane. We become risk-averse and unrewarded. As we approach another season of pledging, of stewardship and pledging, the story of the buried talent and the myth of scarcity is somewhat of a cautionary tale for us, because we want to make sure that in our own living, we aren't being too stymied by the constant message that you get from the 24-hour news media that things are just so doggone awful and terrible in this world. And they're really not. There is still much good in our world. There is still much to look forward to. We have much work to do. We must own our responsibility toward the earth, towards our living, towards our neighbors, towards each other in this congregation. But it is the story of abundance, finding a balance between what you have to give and being careful not to bury what you have under a shroud of fear. So as we face in this congregation another fiscal year, what will our story be? Our situation, our context is much different than it was from last year. Profoundly. Will our story be one of overwhelm by fear and uncertainty, or will it be facing down our fears and putting our faith to the test? If we can imagine a grim future, we can just as easily imagine a bright future. Because none of us knows for sure what's going to happen in the next hour, much less the next year. But let us maintain that sense of generosity of spirit, a sense of abundance. And abundance means not excess, but enough. Abundance means having enough to do what we need to do. Within the next few weeks, the congregation will begin the annual budget drive for the fiscal year that starts April 1st and goes to March 31st of 2024. Our pledges will be the main source of income supporting the operating costs of our fellowship. And that includes being in search and preparing the way for a new settled minister. It'll be a test of whether we can maintain our vision, putting what? Talent and treasure, time, talent, and treasure, which we like to say. So talent in the contemporary sense, what our skills are, what we can contribute personally, our time, and our gifts, and then our treasure. We have to put those to good use so that we can expand our capacity to live into our mission, our vision, and our identity as a religious community free in faith, united in caring, diverse in thought, and committed to action. Yes, to make a pledge in today's world is a risk. And each must decide for themselves what that balance will be. Each of you must find your balance. But remember that your financial support of the fellowship is more, much, much more than financial commitment. It's an act of faith, an act of hope, an act of love. It's an investment in what is meaningful. It's an investment in maintaining a community of people who will do good works, a community of people with whom we share values. We don't all share the exact same worldview or meta-narrative or belief or theologies, but we do agree on what our values are and how we live into those values that will make a difference in this world. That is what you're supporting. One last word on the value of generosity and an abundance of spirit is remember that others have gone before us, and what they have already given, we honor them in our giving. There could be no more critical time in the life of this fellowship, so let us find that balance between deep commitment and fearful support. May we be courageous stewards of the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Boca Raton.